Welcome to season 2, episode 1 of Beyond Labels. Thanks so much for tuning in. This episode isn't another summary of one of my papers from academia. Like I discussed about a problem statement in episode 1 of season 1, this season begins with a similar problem statement, but it's with an in depth insight into the root cause of the problem. Since the past couple of years, the deeper I've gone into psychology, nerve system research, media, human behavior, modern overstimulation, the harder it has become to ignore what is happening around us. The rising anxiety, the emotional fragmentation, the loneliness, burnout, escapism, and millions of people struggling beneath the surface while trying to function normally every single day. And now, with growing global instability and uncertainty, one concern keeps staying with me more than anything else: the slow erosion of human connection and psychological stability in a world increasingly designed to keep people emotionally activated, distracted, and exhausted. And that concern is one of the reasons I want to continue to build beyond labels. Not to add more noise into an already overloaded world, but to slow things down long enough to help people think more clearly. To take complex psychological, social, behavioral, and systemic patterns and break them into conversations people can actually sit with, reflect on, and understand more deeply. And this isn't about outrage cycles, it's not about tribalism, and it's definitely isn't about cheap dopamine. That's the last thing I want to do. It's about depth, awareness, pattern recognition, better decision making, politically, personally, financially, and all the things that are actually necessary for you to lead a more fruitful and happier and stable and regulated life. And hopefully helping more people reconnect with themselves before stress, distraction, emotional suppression, and overstimulation completely consumes their inner world. And it's not easy doing this in a world optimized for speed over reflection. But I have to do my best to figure out what worked for me can actually potentially work for a lot of other people. Because I was super dysregulated a couple years ago. I had thoughts that I shouldn't have had, but I had no way to curb those thoughts. But I found a way, and nobody taught me how to do it. I listened to my inner voice. And that's exactly my point. We have an untapped intelligence within us that we don't yet have the knowledge to tap into yet. And honestly, that's why I wanted to begin this season with the conversation we are about to have today. Because I think a lot of people, regardless of politics, are starting to feel the same thing in different ways. A kind of psychological instability that is difficult to fully explain. People feel mentally exhausted, emotionally overstimulated, financially uncertain, and constantly pulled into narratives that demand immediate reaction before there is even time to think clearly. And time again, the more I have studied human behavior, the media systems, the political rhetoric, and collective psychology, the more I realize that this is not happening by accident alone. Modern systems increasingly reward emotional activation because emotionally activated populations stay engaged longer, they react faster, they spend more time online, and become easier to organize around identity, fear, outrage, and certainty. And I'll give you extremely good examples that will help you relate to what I'm trying to say here. This whole narrative manipulation changes the entire atmosphere of society. You can literally feel it in the language nowadays. Political conversations no longer sound like disagreements between people trying to solve problems. More and more, they sound like emotional warfare. Every issue becomes existential. Every election becomes the most important election in history. Every disagreement becomes betrayal. Every criticism becomes persecution. Every opposing side becomes dangerous, corrupt, evil, anti American. And once language reaches that level long enough, something important starts happening psychologically. People stop relating to politics as policy and begin relating it to as identity. And that is when reflection starts collapsing underneath emotional attachment. And at that point, facts alone stop mattering as much as people think they do. Because once identity becomes emotionally fused to a political movement, protecting the identity often becomes more important than examining reality objectively. The loss starts feeling humiliating, the accountability starts feeling hostile, the criticism starts feeling personal. That is where escalation begins. And honestly, this is one of the reasons I've been paying such close attention to the rhetoric surrounding Donald Trump over the last several years. And I'm saying several years because I've been living in Canada since 2020, 2019 actually. And I started reading a book about him written by Michael Cohen, his longtime lawyer, which is why everything started changing for me. I wanted to learn more and more about him, how he reached to the level where he is, and how exactly things can go haywire if he's not contained or he's not understood by people the way people should have understood him long time ago. That's where pattern recognition comes in, and not simply from a political perspective but from a psychological one. What concerns me is not just the individual behavior itself but the emotional ecosystem forming around him. The language has become increasingly aggressive, increasingly loyalty driven, increasingly centered around grievances, enemies, revenge, and institutional distrust. Terms connected to election, poll watching, political enemies, national betrayal, and retaliation are becoming normalized in ways that would have sounded deeply alarming to large portions of the public not very long ago. And this is not about one political party anymore. It's about what happened to democratic systems when large populations become emotionally conditioned to operate from chronic fear, uncertainty, humiliation, and anger. Because once politics becomes emotionally fused with survival psychology, institutions themselves start getting pulled into identity battles. And they were never designed to handle this. We saw a version of this during January 6th. In 2021, what struck me most afterward was not only the event itself, but how instantly the country split into completely different psychological realities. One side saw democratic destabilization, another side saw patriotism and resistance. The same event, the same day, was interpreted through entirely different emotional frameworks. And that fragmentation was already the warning because once population becomes emotionally committed to incompatible narratives. Democratic systems become extremely vulnerable to manipulation, escalation, and institutional erosion. 5 years later, look where we are. And this is exactly where psychology matters more than ideology. A person with a severely threatened ego structure does not process defeat the same way a regulated person does. Loss can start feeling like humiliation. And it's literally playing on the world stage right now. Humiliation starts feeling existential. Go open Truth Social and see all the posts, AI or non AI. Just simple words. And once things are going haywire, sideways, destruction, the retaliation becomes psychologically easier than reflection. There is no self reflection at all. And I cannot even fathom how it's ever going to be possible as well. Escalating emotional language, escalating blame, escalating conspiracy narratives, escalating demands for loyalty, and increasingly unstable attempts to preserve image dominance at all costs. The problem is that modern media systems reward the escalation. Outrage spreads faster than context. Fear is spreading faster than nuance. And emotionally charged narratives spread much faster than careful analysis ever will. We are not even able to think independently ever. We don't have our own headspace to do any kind of analysis of our own because it's complex. That's why anybody can lie and make you believe a certain stat, and you don't have the time or energy to sit and evaluate if it's true or not because you're part of the system which is designed to keep you part of the system, to keep you inside the system. It is not designed to keep maintaining your sanity. It was always our own responsibility to find our own sanity. And honestly, I think this is the part many people are beginning to feel most deeply right now. People are tired, not just politically tired, nervous system tired. People are working harder while feeling less secure. Housing costs keep rising, debt keeps rising, layoffs continue spreading. Groceries, transportation, and basic living expenses continue putting pressure on ordinary families who are already trying to survive paycheck to paycheck. When populations remain under that kind of chronic stress long enough, it changes people psychologically. The attention spans are shorter, emotional reactivity is increasing, fear becomes easier to trigger. The long term thinking becomes more difficult because the nervous system shifts into survival prioritization. Because if I'm too focused on surviving, I would not have any time for thinking. The books that I'm reading right now, if I was stuck in my survival mode, I would never have the time and energy to even flip a paper. I'm on page 1, and moving from page 1 to page 2 will take forever. Because how can I focus when there's so much noise around me? And under those conditions, people often stop looking for truth, start looking for relief. So if I'm too stuck on survival and relief, I would not have the headspace, the energy to learn something new that is actually beneficial for my own growth, that can actually help me evolve as a human being. And that is why certainty becomes so seductive during unstable times. That's why we doom scroll, because that's familiar. That's why we are looking for cheap dopamine, because that's the fastest way, the instant most gratification that you can have, the good food that you can eat. And I'm not saying you should not eat good food, but it's the awareness that's lacking. Like, what are we exactly doing on autopilot? When are we actually going to start living a life of meaning? Is there any purpose to this life outside the regular emotional loops of anxiety? Are we so normalized with the uncertainties that we have been okay for a long time to live this way, knowing that this is not the right way to live? And I'm not deciding for you what is the right way of living for you. You know deep down that I used to be happier a couple years ago, a few decades ago. And this is not exactly the life I imagined in 2026. That's exactly why certainty becomes so seductive during unstable times. Not because certainty is always accurate, but because certainty temporarily calms anxiety faster than complexity does. And this is where I think many people are beginning to notice something uncomfortable. Political systems, media systems, financial systems, and algorithmic platforms often benefit from keeping populations emotionally activated. Now we are getting somewhere. Not necessarily because there is some perfectly coordinated master plan behind everything, but because outrage, fear, instability, and emotional engagement generate attention, influence, money, and power. The result is a society where people are constantly reacting, but rarely regulating, constantly consuming, but rarely reflecting, constantly stimulated, but increasingly disconnected from clarity. There you have it. Do you have complete clarity of what's going on? No, because we are constantly stimulated. We are getting bombarded with notifications. And this is why I keep saying that one of the most important skills moving forward is psychological self regulation. Not spending every waking hour doom scrolling throughout the outage cycles. Not outsourcing your entire emotional stability to governments, media personalities, ideological movements, or online narratives, but learning how to stay mentally grounded while moving through systems that increasingly reward emotional chaos. Because regardless of politics, ordinary people absorb the consequences the same way, through anxiety, through uncertainty, through financial pressure, through overstimulation, through the slow erosion of meaning and stability. And then we see the same pattern extending globally through war narratives and political escalation. Now, take Iran for example. It's on everybody's mind these days. Even if you want to distract yourself, think about something else. You go to the gas station and you think about it instantly. When is this going to end? One of the things that stands out immediately when you start studying modern geopolitical discourse is how quickly historical complexity gets compressed into emotionally simplified narratives. Decades of international disputes, sanctions, negotiations, legal settlements, intelligence operations, economic interests, and regional power struggles all are getting reduced into short, emotionally charged slogans designed for mass reaction. Let me repeat that. It is getting reduced into short, emotionally charged slogans designed for mass reaction. The Obama era money narrative is a perfect example of this. This was a legally complex settlement tied to frozen Iranian funds and decades old agreements, which became transformed into a simple emotional image that spread rapidly because emotionally charged narratives moves faster than historical context ever will. Because we don't have the time to go back to history and find out what exactly happened. Most of us don't. I don't. But I'm trying because I have the headspace. But can we have the ability to develop that kind of headspace to have the ability to absorb more knowledge and process more knowledge rather than just depending on an emotionally volatile figure out there holding one of the most powerful offices in the world to dictate what we should think? Because independent thinking is a given, it's your birthright. So that's the intention behind all the data that I'm trying to share with you. All these emotional impressions, when they settle into public consciousness, facts struggle to catch up. And meanwhile, ordinary people around the world end up carrying the consequences of geopolitical instability through inflation. It's happening right now, in real time, May 18th. Supply chain disruption, rising energy costs, economic uncertainty, and growing psychological exhaustion. That is exactly why independent thinking matters so much right now. And people deserve context. People deserve historical continuity. People deserve analysis that connects psychology, economics, media incentives, institutional pressure, nervous system regulation, geopolitical instability into one coherent picture instead of endless fragmented outrage loops designed purely for engagement. Because the deeper issue is no longer just one politician, one country, or one election cycle. It is the larger environment rewarding spectacle over reflection, emotional manipulation over regulation, identity addiction over accountability, and narrative control over reality based leadership. And once you begin seeing that pattern clearly, it becomes difficult to unsee it. You can see how everything starts spreading fear so quickly. You start noticing how quickly this fear is spreading everywhere, how easily exhausted populations become emotionally steerable, how outrage moves faster than verification, how constant stimulation slowly erodes public instability. It's eroding people's ability to think clearly, reflect deeply, or remain psychologically grounded. And I think that realization changes your responsibility. Not in the sense that you suddenly become morally superior because you notice the pattern earlier than others, but because awareness creates responsibility. And that responsibility is to slow down. Slow down and think clearly, to regulate yourself before reacting emotionally, to stop allowing every other algorithm, every other headline, every political spectacle, and every outrage cycle to hijack your nervous system. Because Donald Trump knows you're looking into all these things. What if you start thinking independently? What is the intention that he has behind his posts, behind all that he's doing to actually make you act a certain way. Whatever he did on January 6, 2021, he made you do it. If human beings cannot learn how to remain psychologically grounded inside increasingly unstable systems, then emotional manipulation will continue outpacing reflection across society. It's time we understand a lot has to change. So take your time with this episode, sit with it for a while, because once you begin noticing the pattern, you start realizing the real pattern may not simply be political anymore. This battle actually is psychological. And when I say psychological, I'm not talking about reducing human struggle to diagnosis, labels, therapy language, or the idea that somebody else is simply going to fix your life for you. I'm talking about something deeper than that: your relationship with yourself, your ability to think outside the emotional noise surrounding you, your ability to slow down long enough to hear your own inner voice beneath the algorithms, narratives, distractions, fears, expectations, and constant stimulation competing for your attention every day. We are simply waking up every day and scrolling, liking, sharing. If you're doing it for educational reasons, it's different. But if you're normalizing this constant stimulation, you're literally making the rich people richer because they're profiting out of your emotional dysregulation. Deep down, most people already know when something feels wrong in their life. The problem is that modern environments rarely leave enough space for people to actually listen to themselves clearly. And before trying to fix governments, politics, relationships, or the world itself, maybe the deeper place to begin is here with the below questions that I'm putting now. What is your relationship with yourself? What are you chasing? What are you avoiding? What desires are actually yours? And which ones were handed to you by culture, insecurity, comparison, fear, loneliness, or emotional conditioning? Because a person disconnected from themselves becomes much easier to emotionally steer, manipulate. And maybe that's part of the deeper crisis unfolding around us now. Not just political instability, but internal instability. Human beings are becoming increasingly disconnected from their own intuition, their own regulation, clarity, meaning, and inner grounding while searching everywhere else for certainty. We all can do better, and I'm still learning as well. And I'm not here for giving you solutions, I'm just here for you to choose some thoughtful exploration, to find more meaning out of this chaos as opposed to more dysregulation. So take your time with this episode, sit with it for a while, because once you begin noticing the patterns, you start seeing that awareness itself becomes a form of responsibility. Not fear, not paranoia, not outrage. Awareness, reflection, and the willingness to think clearly in a world constantly demanding reaction. Thanks for listening. This is Beyond Labels.